President Rodrigo Duterte has appointed Supreme Court Associate Justice Lucas Bersamin as the new next Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Bersamin served as Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals in March 2003 before he was assigned to the Supreme Court in 2009. Among the notable cases that Bersamin handled was the declaration of the disbursement acceleration program of former President Benigno Aquino III as unconstitutional and the bail granted to former Senator Juan Ponce Enrile. Also, he voted in favor of the internment of the late President Ferdinand Marcos at the libingan ng mga bayani, as well as in the controversial ouster of former Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno. Despite his controversial rulings, Bersamin vows to remain fair and independent in deciding cases.
Let me assure you that I have always given these matters analytical attention and deep study. So when the time comes for me to give a vote, if it is a collegial court, or to render a judgment when I was still in the trial court, I always did my best to come up with a fair and legal and valid ruling.
Bersamin will retire on October 18, 2019. Meanwhile, former peace advisor Jess Dureza assures the office of the presidential advisor on the peace process is in a stable state after he stepped down from the agency. Dureza on Tuesday voluntarily quit his post after President Rodrigo Duterte sacked two of his subordinates over allegations of corruption. In a letter addressed to President Duterte, Dureza said he will take full responsibility and was saddened that the institution had to suffer publicly due to the acts of a few. Dureza is leaving the OPAPP just when the government is in the final phase of the peace process with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and while the government is pushing for the last stages of the Bangsamoro Organic Law. In other news, President Rodrigo Duterte calls for a careful approach to the problem on illegal Chinese workers in the country. Duterte says this is no question that illegal Chinese workers should be deported, but the Philippines should be cautious on such crackdowns because there are Filipinos getting lenient treatment abroad. During a Senate inquiry on the influx of foreign workers in the Philippines, it was revealed that the Labor Department has issued around 52,000 alien employment permits for workers from China. Labor officials have said the Chinese enter the country using tourist visas before getting short-term permits to work for online gaming firms. Apart from China, Duterte also notes the high number of Filipinos illegally working in Malaysia, Indonesia, and in South Korea.
Be deported. But in the same manner, you should be careful. Because when you point to the Chinese, you're also pointing yourself at us. There are so many thousands of Filipinos working there who went inside China as tourists and working there.
Senate vows to ratify the proposed 2019 national budget before Congress goes on a holiday break on December 13. According to Senate Majority Floor Leader Juan Miguel Zubiri, senators are willing to work double time to approve the budget proposal on the third and final reading by December 11 or 12. They also eye to convene the bicameral conference committee to ratify the reconciled version of the budget proposal on December 13. The Senate's decision came after its meeting earlier with Budget Secretary Benjamin Diokno, who reiterated the importance of passing the budget on time, citing negative implications to government projects and services.
We'd like to show the public that the Senate is willing to work double time, overtime, even though we just got the budget measure only a few days ago.
The Department of Energy, or DOE, warns that oil prices might increase in the coming weeks if the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries pushes through with plans to cut down oil production. OPEC is set to meet on December 6 to discuss possible production cut amid declining world oil prices due to fears of oversupply. Analysts have earlier said that oil producers are churning out more oil than the world needs amid trade tensions, weighing down oil prices. DOE says low oil prices are good for fuel importing countries, but poses economic risks to oil-producing countries like Iran.
Pag nangyari yung December 6 na meeting, baka maka-apekto yun. So hopefully, kung maka-apekto man, hindi ganun ang pagtaas ulit.
Communist Party of the Philippines founding chairman Joma Sison slammed President Rodrigo Duterte's plan to form his own hit squad to combat the new People's Army. Sison called Duterte's plan as a dangerous proposal that will bestow power upon the military to liquidate civilians suspected of being NPA members. Sison also clarified that the communist rebel Sparrow units had long been defunct. Duterte on Tuesday said he is considering forming his own hit squad with the former NPA rebels who returned to the government fold as its members to fight the NPA Special Partisan Unit. The Sparrow unit was formed in the 1980s during the regime of late President Ferdinand Marcos. The president's statement comes amid continuing friction between the government and communist rebels, whose peace negotiations fell through in 2017 over continued attacks on state troops.
Ang kulang talaga is ang Sparrow ko rin. Dyan lang man sila makalamang. Sa bukid, fight man yan. So mag-create ako ng Sparrow. Duterte Death Squad against the Sparrow. I will match their talent also for assassinating people.
The World Meteorological Organization says there is a 75 to 80% chance of a weak El Niño forming within 3 months. The naturally occurring event causes changes in the temperature of the Pacific Ocean and has a major influence on weather patterns around the world. It is linked to floods in South America and droughts in Africa and Asia. El Niño events often lead to record-breaking temperatures as heat rises from the Pacific.
Sea surface temperatures are already at weak El Niño levels in part of the tropical Pacific, but the corresponding atmospheric patterns have not yet kicked in. So to have a fully fledged El Niño, we need both sea surface temperatures and the atmosphere. It sort of takes two to tango in this case.
And for the news abroad, here's Stephanie C. live from Hong Kong. Stephanie, good evening.
Good evening, William. A person was killed and 2 others were seriously injured when torrential rains lashed and caused flash flooding and power outage in Sydney, Australia. Eileen Ciliano tells us why.
Torrential rain and gale force wind lashed Australia's biggest city, Sydney, on Wednesday, causing commuters chaos, flooding streets, railway stations and homes, grounding flights and leaving hundreds of people without electricity. The New South Wales State Emergency Service answered hundreds of calls for assistance and reported 15 successful flood rescues. 1 person was killed in a car crash during the storm, and 2 police officers were seriously injured when a tree fell on them as they assisted a stranded motorist. New South Wales Ambulance said 9 people in Sydney were transported to hospital.
So between 6 a.m. and 12 p.m. today, New South Wales Ambulance paramedics have responded to 47 motor vehicle crashes across the state, which is actually 4 times the average. Of the 33 that have occurred in Sydney, 9 people have been transported to hospital. One of those has been a New South Wales Police Force officer who was transported after assisting other citizens that were caught in flooded waters.
Australia's Bureau of Meteorology said within just a few hours, Sydney received more than 100 millimeters of rain, a level that the country's most populous city would normally receive throughout the whole of November.
Areas of concern for us as the afternoon goes forward is the fact that there is still a high potential for localised flash flooding. As the thunderstorms and the high winds come through this afternoon, that's going to create a significant risk depending on where they fall. And it's really hard to be able to pinpoint the exact location of the metropolitan area where there'll be really intense rainfall for a short period of time that will cause flash flooding. That could be in pretty much anywhere.
Sydney Airport, the country's busiest, said it cancelled at least 20 flights after closing 2 of its 3 runways, while the majority of flights that continued suffered delays. Authority urged people to stay safe ahead of more forecast storms later on Wednesday. Eileen Ciliano, UNTV News and Rescue, Australia.
A United Nations report says the gap of greenhouse gas emissions is wider than ever. It has reached a record high of 53.5 billion tons in 2017. Piching Vizcara Garin will tell us why.
Global greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 could be between 13 billion and 15 billion tons more than the level needed to keep global warming within 2 degrees Celsius this century, a United Nations report estimated on Tuesday. The 9th Annual UN Environment Program or UNEP report analyzed the impact of countries' emissions cut targets and policies and whether they are enough to limit global average temperature rise to a safer threshold below 2 degrees Celsius. UNEP said annual greenhouse gas emissions reached a record high of 53.5 billion tons in 2017. After 3 years of decreases, they are not seen peaking by 2030, let alone by 2020. However, emissions in 2030 will need to be around 25% and 55% lower than last year to put the world on track to limit global warming to 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees Celsius respectively, the report said.
Currently, we are headed to 3.2 degrees Celsius warming. If we need to get to the 2 degrees Celsius gap, we need to do 3 times more. If we want 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to do 5 times more than what we are doing now.
The study says the countries including Argentina, Australia, Canada, the EU including the UK, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and the US are falling short of achieving their nationally determined contributions for 2030. The burning and clearing of forests in Asia contributes hugely to emissions. 3 countries, Brazil, China, and Japan, are currently on track, while 3 others, India, Russia, and Turkey, are set to beat their targets. The authors believe that some of these achievements may be down to setting relatively low targets for their national plans. The UN is placing great hopes in what it terms non-state actors, meaning local, city, and regional governments, businesses, and higher education institutions can have major impacts on the future gap.
Whether biodiversity is your thing, or sustainable finance, or the health of the planet and the people, or prosperity, or peace, or human movements. I mean, you just pick up anything you like, everything is at risk if we do not buckle up and prevent from the catastrophic risks that the world is facing today.
The report aims to inform delegates at the UN Climate Conference, which starts in Poland from December 2 to 14. The talks will produce a rulebook on how to implement the 2015 Paris Agreement, which aims to limit the rise in global temperatures to between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. Piching Vizcara Garin, UNTV News and Rescue, Paris, France.
U.S. President Donald Trump may possibly cancel his scheduled meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit. Meanwhile, lawmakers from several countries accuse Facebook of undermining democratic institutions after its chief executive Mark Zuckerberg failed to appear during a hearing in the United Kingdom. Victor Cosare tells us why.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he may cancel a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin following a maritime clash between Russia and Ukraine. Trump says he is still waiting for a full report after Russian ships fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian boats on Sunday. The 2 leaders are due to meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Buenos Aires later this week. Meanwhile, the U.S. has urged European states to do more to support Ukraine. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert says Washington wanted to see tougher enforcement of sanctions against Russia. In United Kingdom, Facebook came under fire on Tuesday from lawmakers from several countries who accused the firm of undermining democratic institutions and lambasted Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg for not answering questions on the matter. Concerns over the social media giant's practices, the role of political adverts, and possible interference in the 2016 Brexit vote and U.S. elections are among the topics being investigated by British and European regulators. While Facebook says it complies with EU data protection laws, a special hearing of lawmakers from several countries around the world in London criticized Zuckerberg for declining to appear himself to answer questions on the topic. Richard Allen, the Vice President of Policy Solutions at Facebook, who appeared in Zuckerberg's stead, admitted Facebook had made mistakes but said it had accepted the need to comply with data rules. And in Indonesia, Indonesian authorities have recommended that budget airline Lion Air improve its safety culture in a preliminary report into last month's deadly crash. On October 29, flight JT610 crashed into the Java Sea shortly after departing Jakarta, killing all 189 people on board. The report details what is known by authorities about the short time the plane was in the air. However, it does not give a definite cause of the accident. Victor Cosare, UNTV News and Rescue.
And those are the news from the other parts of the globe. Back to you, William.
Thank you very much, Stephanie C., live from Hong Kong. Mr. Public Service Kuya Daniel Razon spends time with children, elderly, and persons with disabilities. Leslie Longbowen tells us why.
Kuya Daniel Razon has been doing public services for 35 years now. And as he celebrates his anniversary, he chose the needy to spend his time with. Kuya Daniel visited the Home for the Minors of Kamanggagawa Foundation Incorporated or KFI. He surprised the children with presents and gave them a biblical advice.
Meron akong natanggap na amin na nga yung wish list ninyo. Basta magpapakabait lang kayo. Yun ang susi ng lahat ng bagay sa buhay ng tao na kumilala sa Diyos, magkaroon ng takot sa Diyos.
Afterwards, Kuya Daniel went straight to the Ang Dating Daan Foundation Incorporated or ADFI Charity Home for the Elderly to check their needs.
Gusto ko po gumamit ng cellphone. Gusto ko lang po makita kahit sa Facebook yung mga anak ko kasi hindi ko sila nakikita 17 years na.
Tingnan nyo kung baka pwedeng kahit na may araw sila ng pag iPad din nyo, bantayan nyo lang at baka makipagligawan.
Radyo.
Kuya Daniel also delighted the elderly as well as persons with disabilities under the care of KFI in Santa Maria, Laguna.
Pensyon! Pensyon sa SSS. Kukunin daw po tayo, ha? Yung pensyon nyo, ha? Magkano ba yung pensyon nyo?
1,500 quarterly.
Jay, pengi ako 1,500 yan. Bigay mo yung pensyon ni tatay, i-advance mo na yung pensyon ni tatay. O yan, may tubo pa.
The elderly also enjoyed as Kuya sang to them.
Ang harap ko'y huwag biguin, sa bayan mo'y makarating, ikaw ay makakapiling, at si Jesus na aking
The homes for the minors, the elderly, and PWDs are just some of Kuya Daniel's projects that aim to help those in need. Leslie Lumboan, UNTV News and Rescue, Philippines.
And on behalf of the Y News staff and technical people, we would like to greet Kuya Daniel Happy 35th year in public service to God and to humanity. And those are the reasons behind the news on November 28, 2018. I am William Theo. Because we need to know, we will always ask why. Good evening.
UNTV, your public service channel.